of so-called shared conversations about same-sex relationships were not expected to radically alter church doctrine. And today's report from the House of Bishops lands squarely on the status quo, that marriage is a lifelong union between a man and a woman. The bishop who led the working group says that while the doctrine doesn't change, the church must adapt its tone.
It's not against the impact of cultural change. We uphold the authority of Scripture, the tradition of the church, in common with the vast and overwhelming majority of churches around the world. But what we want to do is to engage with the culture of which we are part. That culture has changed radically.
But lesbian and gay members of the church have reacted with disappointment, accusing the bishops of doing nothing to acknowledge the goodness or sanctity of lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender relationships.
Substantially no change in terms of the doctrine of marriage. A little bit of warmth, a little tilt perhaps in the direction of greater inclusion, but we're a long way from that yet. But I think that's pretty much what most people expected. It's a sort of classic Anglican fudge and a sideways step and a nudge in a different patch of the long grass perhaps.
Conservative evangelicals, however, have expressed relief that the bishops have upheld the authority of Scripture against the impact of cultural change.
I want the church to stand with the teaching of Jesus, and my understanding is Jesus taught very clearly that sex is for marriage and marriage is between a man and a woman. So I want the church to continue to teach what Jesus taught on that issue, to try and find ways of commending that lovingly to the world around us.
This report will be debated at General Synod, which begins in just over 2 weeks' time. Martin Bashir, BBC News at Church House in London.
A 900-year-old skeleton found in Hampshire has revealed important clues about the history of leprosy. Researchers say the remains of the man, thought to be a religious pilgrim, were excavated from a burial site in Winchester. Scientific detective work suggests he caught the highly contagious skin disease while on travels to a shrine in Spain and brought it back with him to the UK.
Now, it's not every day that a tropical turtle washes up on a beach in Wales. But that's exactly what's happened in November, when a rare turtle turned up in Anglesey. Experts say they've seen nothing like it on British shores, as Sian Lloyd now reports.
An early morning start and another step on a journey that could eventually lead to this tropical sea turtle being released back into the wild. She was driven all the way from Anglesey, where she was found last November, to Hertfordshire. 6 hours later, and the team at the Royal Veterinary College were preparing their unique patient. They've never seen an olive ridley here before. Menai is the first to be spotted in British waters since records began almost 270 years ago. Getting a sea turtle into the scanning machine is no easy task, but experts need to check her lungs for damage.
We can see her shell all around, and we can see her lungs. And we can see also that there is some gas, which is black, and that is outside her lungs. So it's free gas, and that's potentially responsible for her buoyancy problem.
Staff caring for her on Anglesey had noticed that Menai was unable to keep below the water. She may be struggling to dive, but the team are delighted by her appetite, which is helping her regain weight.
She's a real character. We've got to know her. She's sort of starting to eat really, really well now. She's demolishing sort of a couple of kilos of calamari a day. And she's a real little personality. She likes to see us. She seems to recognise people. She knows what's going on.
Olive ridleys can travel vast distances, but it's thought this one was carried by currents thousands of miles off course.
Menai the turtle has been through a lot, and now it's time for some TLC.
Gel is being applied to prevent her skin from drying, and she's being kept warm, ready for her journey back to Anglesey, while experts decide her future. Sian Lloyd, BBC News.
Some news just coming through from BA in the last few moments. In fact, it's from the Unite Union, I should explain, but talking about British Airways. Another 6 days of strikes will take place in February, says Unite, as part of that continuing dispute about pay. There are no dates given as yet, but we will try to see whether we can find out what they might be. Unite says there will be 6 days of strikes in February, part of that continuing dispute.
Time for the weather. Helen Willits joins us now. She's got the forecast.
Indeed I have. Thanks, Simon. Hello there, Jane. Good afternoon to you. It's a gradual change already. It doesn't feel as bitter out there in most parts of the country, but there's still some of that cold air just holding on. And so we do still have a little bit of fog around the Firth of Forth up in Scotland and also in Sheffield, and a lot of rime ice as well, as you can see here. So the cold air is still not completely disappeared, but we've also had some sunshine, temporary sunshine in Suffolk, the clouds really coming and going, but the theme really is that it will be much milder. But with the milder air coming in off the Atlantic, it also means some more clouds. So we've had this cold air for quite some time now. It's this milder Atlantic air which will come through as we head into the weekend, in fact the rest of today. So you can see the cloud and where the breaks are up towards northern and eastern areas. You can see some showers coming to the south. This is shower cloud out to the west as well. So we've got all that cloud building across the UK. And so as we go through the evening and overnight, there will be a few more spots of rain and drizzle and a little bit of winteriness on the northern edge of that going into Scotland. Could be a bit slippery and icy in these areas. So it's still cold air, so it's still cold enough for some ice as well tomorrow morning across Northern Ireland, for example, where we've had the overnight rain. But once that clears away and it's a bright day here and the temperatures rise, not too bad at all, but it could be a really slow brighten up further west. So it does look as if come the afternoon we'll see a little bit of brightness and sunshine coming through across the southwest of England, but further east on Saturday, probably quite grey. Some rain, probably the first significant rain we've had for some time in eastern areas. It's still cold enough, the air, for some snow over the hills, as you can see. A fairly blustery breeze as well, blowing in those showers following into the north and west. Those showers then clear away through Saturday evening, just a few wintry flurries around over the hills, and then through the night it's the major fly in the ointment, or bit of a headache for us weather forecasters as we move into Sunday. It does look as if, well, south of the M4 it's going to be pretty wet on Sunday, and across Scotland at the moment a cold start on Sunday, but it does look mainly dry. So those are the two things we're more certain about. It's the bit in between, so Northern Ireland, Northern England, the Midlands and Wales. How far north is this weather system going to go? On Wednesday it was much further south, and today it's a little further south than yesterday. So obviously the detail is going to be quite tricky for central regions. So if you are out and about, you've got plans for Sunday, it looks as if we'll see some rain around, quite wet weather for a change, wet and windy weather, particularly for England and Wales, probably Northern Ireland as well, but Scotland might escape. Chilly start, 5 or 6 in the north. It carries on unsettled but milder next week.
In 2008, the election of Barack Obama seemed to some to herald the dawn of a post-racial United States. 8 years on, what has happened to that dream? I've been to Louisiana to ask what it means to be black in Trump's America. Our World, Saturday and Sunday at 9:30 p.m. on the BBC News Channel.
This is BBC News. I'm Simon McCoy. The headlines at 4. Theresa May is to become the first foreign leader to meet Donald Trump. She hopes to open the way to a trade deal after Brexit. Ahead of the meeting, the Prime Minister laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington Cemetery in Virginia.
I'm Barbara Pledasher at the White House, where preparations are underway to welcome Theresa May. She's expected to arrive in about an hour.
2 men are sentenced to a total of 12 years for manslaughter after a runaway tipper truck killed 4 people, including a 4-year-old girl in Bath.
Tragically, this incident and subsequent loss of life, serious injury and long-standing effects on the community were totally foreseeable and also avoidable.
A member of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet resigns in protest at his decision to force Labour MPs to vote in favour of triggering Brexit.
And I'm Jane Hill. Also here in the next hour, plans to ration hip and knee operations in Worcestershire. Very obese patients and people in only moderate pain won't qualify. Surgeons have expressed alarm at the proposal, which is aimed at saving money. Tesco's share price rises sharply after the supermarket chain says it's buying the food wholesaler Booker. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to BBC News. Theresa May is preparing to meet Donald Trump at the White House in the next hour. She will become the first world leader to visit Washington since he became president. Global security and a trade deal once Britain's left the EU are high on the agenda. In a speech to US Republicans last night, Theresa May said the UK and America shouldn't return to failed military interventions to try to remake the world, as she put it. Richard Lister reports.
The Prime Minister began her day in the chill winter sunshine of Arlington National Cemetery, paying her respects to America's war dead. Security's at the heart of the transatlantic relationship, but so is trade, and it's hopes of a future deal that's driving this visit. On the quayside in Liverpool, cars bound for the United States, and construction equipment too. President Trump has promised a building boom, and Britain wants a part of that.
For us as a company, ACL, if we can get a slice of that, we can export the goods that he needs to carry on with that construction he's looking at.
Britain's trading relationship with the United States is already a healthy one. The UK exports goods to the US worth £45 billion. That's a fifth of UK global exports. And Britain sells more goods than it buys, with imports totalling £35 billion. We export more to the US than we do to any other country, but we're only America's fifth biggest market. We need them more than they need us. In his first week as president, Donald Trump has said repeatedly his strategy will be buy American, hire American. And although he wants bilateral trade deals, they'll come with conditions attached.
We want to deal with the ones that treat us well. And if they don't treat us well, we terminate, or we give them a 30-day notice of termination. And then they come back and they want to renegotiate during that 30 days, and we get a better deal.
And until Britain gets out of the EU, only Brussels can make UK trade deals. Britain's Chancellor's there today, and he accepted London's hands are currently tied.
We will continue to abide by the rules and the regulations and the laws of the European Union for so long as we are members. So, of course, we want to strengthen our trade ties with the very many trade partners we have around the world, but we're very mindful of our obligations under the treaty, and we will follow them precisely.
And for now, the key players in Europe are wary of what Mr. Trump has to offer.
Let's speak frankly. There are challenges that the US administration poses to our trade rules. So we of course have to talk to Donald Trump. He was elected. But we also have to promote our interests and values as Europeans.
Back in Liverpool, this golden eagle marks the US consulate established here in 1790, a reminder of long-standing Anglo-American trade ties. Today, though, it's a French restaurant. That's a reminder the relationship can't be taken for granted.
The special relationship, so-called, was only really important from the British point of view. It might genuinely be this: we're going to prioritise American workers, American manufacturing, American jobs to the exclusion of other trading partners.
The picture may become a little clearer later today. Richard Lister, BBC News.
Let's get more on this with our Washington correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher. I mean, what have we got? I'm excited about this. I'm just wondering if they're as excited over there as we seem to be over here about this.
I think there's interest here, but I don't think it's the same level of excitement. No, it's the American relationship for Britain is, I think, much more important and certainly more talked about than it is here. People here like Britain. They follow British serials. They liked the royal family. They will be welcoming Ms. May as the first foreign leader to see Mr. Trump. And even the Trump administration has given the message that this shows, you know, a commitment to the special relationship. And he's spoken very positively about Ms. May. But I think in terms of the strategic significance of it and the interest of it, there's much more at stake here for Britain. Mrs. May will want to make sure she gets off to a good start in putting Britain's interests forward with this new administration, getting a commitment to keeping up that special relationship, and also showing other countries that there are options for Britain when it leaves the EU. So I think you're following it. We're following it much more closely than many American networks.
In terms of the choreography, how long will the two leaders have together, perhaps on their own, I don't know, but how long will they have before this press conference where everybody's going to be watching everything, aren't they?
Yes, from what I understand, Mrs. May is supposed to arrive in about an hour. The colour guard has just been practicing to welcome her. This is the guard that has the flags representing each state and then the British and American flags as well. The meeting will happen before 1 o'clock. So sometime in that period, we understand the meeting will take place at 1 o'clock as the news conference, and then I believe a lunch is scheduled. So she will have a fair amount of time with Mr. Trump. How much of that is going to be involved in sort of very, head-on, serious talk is not quite clear, but she has a clear agenda that she wants to present, and he is quite, I think, eager to show a successful foreign visit here. It's the first foreign leader that he's hosting, and he'll want to make sure it goes off without a hitch, or at least his staff will want to make sure it goes off without a hitch.
I mean, we're talking about two very different people, but Theresa May on the plane yesterday was saying, you never know, opposites attract.
Yeah, well, interestingly, the New York Times this morning said she doesn't even have a Twitter account, which, Americans are really getting used to communicating with their president by Twitter. So, yes, they are very different, probably more different than any American and British leader ever. You've got the bold, brash New York billionaire who likes controversy. He likes to shake things up, even if he's not sure where things will settle once he's done that. And Mrs. May, as you know, is reserved. She's prudent. She's meticulously briefed. She's very cautious. Just completely different people, come from different cultures, but she does want to develop a personal relationship with Mr. Trump, she said, in order to develop a very good working relationship, and that relationship she hopes will be focused on getting across Britain's point of view on a number of things, not only this trade deal that she hopes Britain will be able to negotiate with America, but on getting across Britain's point of view on other things like the importance of NATO, which Mr. Trump has said is obsolete, the importance of the strength of the European Union, which he has been somewhat dismissive about, and other things. So she will be speaking about the special relationship, but also saying things that Britons need her to say.
Barbara, if anybody tells you again she hasn't got a Twitter account, tell them to go to Theresa_May. She has.
Oh, right, okay. I guess the New York Times didn't. I should have.
We'll talk to you later. Thanks for that.
And of course, just to remind you...
I'm doing this without moving my lips. You can see full coverage of Theresa May's visit to Washington here on BBC News, including that news conference with Donald Trump. As we've been saying, expected 6 o'clock, but whatever time that happens, this is the place where you'll see it.
Now we'll look at today's other main stories. And the boss of a haulage company and a mechanic have been sent to prison for the manslaughter of 4 people who died when a tipper truck with faulty brakes went out of control in Bath. Matthew Gordon, seen here on the left, was given a 7.5-year sentence. Peter Wood was given 5 years and 3 months. 3 men and a 4-year-old girl died instantly when the truck went out of control down a steep hill in Bath 2 years ago. Our correspondent John Kay gave us the very latest straight after that sentencing at Bristol Crown Court.
The judge here said there could be no excuse for the state of that truck when it careered down a hill out of control. The brakes failed and 4 people were hit and died instantly. He said it would have been obvious to anyone that there were problems with that vehicle, that the brakes were so faulty, and yet it was driven that day, it lost control that day, and those 4 lives were lost. We're just waiting for some of the families of the bereaved to leave court, but earlier today they each in turn gave very emotional, desperately emotional statements, victim impact statements to the judge to explain how the loss had affected them 2 years ago. And they spoke about the silence in their homes now, about being left with voids in their lives. And that came before the judge passed down the sentences.
They all lost their lives in a matter of seconds. 4-year-old Mitzi Steady, chauffeur Steve Vaughan, and businessmen Philip Allen and Robert Parker. Killed by a 32-ton truck, its brakes had failed while coming down a steep hill into the city of Bath. Just before Christmas, these men were found guilty on 4 counts of manslaughter. On the left, Matthew Gordon, who ran the Grittenham Haulage Company. And on the right, Peter Wood, a mechanic whose job was to check the lorry. Pictures of the vehicle's brakes were shown in court. The jury was told they were badly worn, rusty and in a poor state of repair. The trial heard the company was a shambles, failing to carry out proper safety checks. Today, relatives of those who were killed have told the court how their lives have been affected. The mother of Mitzi Steady said her family is bereft and she finds it a struggle to go on without Mitzi's laughter and singing filling their home. Mitzi's grandmother, who was also hit by the truck, needed to have both her legs amputated. She described the physical and emotional pain she's been left with, saying life has changed completely. The wife of Steve Vaughan told the court about the moment she went to see her husband's body. She said as she held him, she played songs that they'd only recently played at their wedding.
It's just been a horrendous time.
At the end of the trial, she told me about the void now in her life.
We were only married for 6 months, and especially having to spend your first wedding anniversary alone was just so far removed from the one that we had planned. It's just been absolutely horrendous.
The widow of Phil Allen said she had been robbed of her soulmate in a horrific accident that should never have happened. She said those responsible had shown a total disregard for the rules of the road. And Robert Parker's widow said she'd thought of nothing else since the moment he was killed by the runaway truck. She said the reckless actions of others means her life will never be the same.
Well, after hearing those impact statements from the various families, the judge has now sentenced these two men. Matthew Gordon, the owner of Grittenham Haulage, getting just over 7 years in prison, and Peter Wood, the mechanic, getting 5 years in prison. The judge said to Matthew Gordon and Wood, he said that this lorry should not have been on the road. The brakes were in appallingly bad shape. These were truly serious faults, he said, which should have been obvious to anyone. They went on to say that the judge told the boss that you were not concerned for the public, you were only concerned with yourself. And then he said that the impact of this crash had clearly been devastating for the families who'd lost their loved ones, as we heard in those statements that we quoted in the piece there. But he said it was devastating also for the emergency services and for people living in the western suburb of Bath 2 years ago, many of whom have told us that they will never forget what they saw and heard that afternoon. So Matthew Gordon sentenced to 7.5 years in prison, Peter Wood to 5 years and 3 months. They'd actually started their prison sentences before Christmas when they were convicted. The judge told them that they were going to face lengthy prison terms and told them they might as well begin those terms straight away. But they had to come back to court today and learn their true fate.
John Kay there at the court. Well, also after sentencing, we heard from Alison Harris from the Crown Prosecution Service, and she gave journalists at the court this statement.
On the 9th of February 2015, a lorry went out of control on Lansdowne Lane in Bath. That lorry was owned by Matthew Gordon and was inadequately maintained by him and by the mechanic he employed, Peter Wood. They failed to keep the brakes in good working order and failed to comply with the conditions imposed on them by the Traffic Commissioner when she granted them an operator's licence. The lorry careered down Lansdowne Lane, which is a steep hill, and killed 4-year-old Mitzi Steady instantly, just after she had got off her bus with her grandmother, Margaret Rogers. Mrs. Rogers, as well as seeing her granddaughter killed in front of her, also suffered life-changing injuries. The lorry then ploughed into a car in which there were 3 men, Stephen Vaughan, Philip Allen and Robert Parker, who were also all killed instantly. Another lady, Carla Brennan, was also seriously injured. Today, Matthew Gordon and Peter Wood have been sentenced, but we need to remember the devastation that their gross negligence caused to innocent lives and their families, as well as the deep impact this has had on the community at large, including the driver of the bus, the emergency services and all the passers-by who attended the scene, many of whom were traumatised by what they saw. The Crown Prosecution Service worked with the police and then with the barristers who presented the case for us for over 18 months in order to achieve this result. We hope that it will bring some sense of justice to all those whose lives have been affected by this terrible collision.
And that the statement from the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, following those sentences handed down at Bristol Crown Court.
You're watching BBC News. Just after 4:15, our headlines. Theresa May is in Washington to meet President Trump. They'll have talks about trade, foreign affairs and strengthening ties between the UK and the US.
2 men have been sentenced to a total of 12 years for manslaughter after a runaway tipper truck killed 4 people in Bath.
A member of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet resigns in protest at his decision to force Labour MPs to vote in favour of triggering Brexit.
In sport, Rafa Nadal reaches his first Grand Slam final for 3 years. He'll face Roger Federer for the Australian Open title on Sunday after beating Grigor Dimitrov in an epic 5-set semi in Melbourne. The 6-time Paralympic champion David Weir claims he was called a disgrace to his country by the British Athletics wheelchair racing coach in Rio after he failed to win a medal last summer. Weir confirmed he'll never race for his country again. And Andy Sullivan moves into the joint lead at the Qatar Masters. The Englishman is one of 9 golfers tied on 8 under par, a record going into the 3rd round of a tour event. Those are the sporting headlines. I have more for you just after past.
Thanks, Lizzie. The Shadow Welsh Secretary Jo Stevens has resigned from Labour's shadow cabinet. It comes after Jeremy Corbyn announced a 3-line whip, the highest form of party discipline, to force MPs to back a bill triggering the UK's withdrawal from the EU. In her resignation letter, the MP for Cardiff Central says she is a passionate European and that triggering Article 50 and leaving the EU would be a terrible mistake. Our political correspondent Leila Nathu told me more from Westminster.
Jo Stevens is the first shadow cabinet member to resign over the 3-line whip, instructing Labour MPs to vote in support of triggering Article 50. And this will be a blow to Jeremy Corbyn, trying to enforce discipline on his MPs who have very different views about what to do. Jo Stevens, you mentioned in her resignation letter, said she was a passionate European, that she believed leaving the EU was a terrible mistake. And she says she hasn't seen enough guarantees yet from Theresa May that triggering Article 50 will protect single market access, protect employment rights and so on. And she says that she certainly does not want to cause difficulties for Jeremy Corbyn, but I think this will be a tricky situation for him. We've already had resignations from other shadow ministers. It follows Tulip Siddiq, the shadow minister for early years. She resigned from her post yesterday, and we've heard from other shadow ministers that they too are thinking about voting against the bill, which is going to be debated in Parliament next week. So I think this does underline just how difficult it is for Jeremy Corbyn to bring his MPs in line over this.
Yes, and I suppose we're looking to see whether others will go.
Absolutely. We've heard from 2 Labour whips. These are the very people that are responsible for enforcing party discipline. And Labour finds itself in a bizarre situation that the people who are supposed to be bringing others into line are themselves actually defying their own orders. So we've heard today from Thangam Debonair. She is following her colleague Jeff Smith, another Labour whip who we heard from last night, who said he was going to be voting against Article 50. Thangam Debonair, the Bristol MP, told us today that she intended to do the same.
I was really clear last year that I would consider the options, but really having looked around, the single European market, full membership of that, not access to it, South Korea's got access to it, full membership of it was the best option for my constituents, their jobs and the businesses and organisations there. Theresa May has ruled that out, so I am going to oppose triggering Article 50.
But where does that leave you as a party whip? Are you going to have to resign?
At the moment, what I'm thinking about is my constituents. I'm heading back to my constituency shortly in Bristol West. I'll be meeting lots of people in constituency.
But will you resign as a whip?
At the moment, what I'm focusing on is representing my constituents.
Interestingly there, Thangam Debonair not saying that she will resign. It isn't clear what sort of punishment the shadow ministers and shadow cabinet members will, shadow ministers who say they are intending to vote against Article 50, will they face sanctions from the leadership? We haven't heard that yet. We heard from Diane Abbott earlier today, the Shadow Home Secretary, saying she understood their concerns, but she said to them, she urged them to think about how it would look if Labour MPs were being seen to be ignoring the referendum result. But this does really reflect the wider problem that Labour faces of trying to appeal to all the different groups of its supporters. Its supporters are very much divided down the middle of Remain supporters and Leave supporters. So I think Jeremy Corbyn, a serial rebel himself over the years, under Tony Blair, under Gordon Brown, I think he is finding out just how hard it is to be on the other side.
Leila Natu there talking about the situation in the Labour Party. Right now, we will return our focus to events in Washington, D.C. in the next hour or so, because you'll know, of course, that the Prime Minister is there and is due to meet the new president within the next hour. A trade deal, or talks about trade anyway, certainly, is what is top of the agenda. Let's have a look briefly at the scene there at the White House. Our correspondent in the last half an hour or so was telling us that the final rehearsals were going on for a fairly grand welcoming for Britain's Prime Minister at the White House. So we are very much keeping an eye on all our camera shots there in Washington, D.C. Not due there for about half an hour or so, but these things can slip, of course, but we will very much keep our eyes and cameras trained on that. Let's discuss the visit as a whole, though, with Dana Allen, who has joined me, Senior Fellow for US Foreign Policy and Transatlantic Affairs at the global think tank, the International Institute for Strategic Studies. A very good afternoon to you. As we wait for this meeting, for these images to be beamed around the world of this meeting, with only 1 week in the White House on the case of Donald Trump, what are your thoughts about who stands to win or lose from this initial meeting?
Well, I think it's a tricky situation, to put it mildly. Donald Trump is unlike any American president since World War II and possibly in American history. It's natural, it's part of the form that one of his earliest meetings would be with a very close ally, the Prime Minister of Britain. But he's proven already in his first week to be so unpredictable, so erratic, and frankly so bullying that it's hard to know what's going to come out of it.
So you've touched on the timing already. Let's start with that. So the fact that 1 week in, it is the British Prime Minister who we are about to see at the White House. Is that driven in any way by Donald Trump, or is that simply his advisors saying, fundamental ally, special relationship, this is who you have to start with?
I think that, as I think I suggested, it's traditional to have an early meeting between the United States and Britain. There's this idea of a special relationship. I think it's actually a word that's used more in the UK than is used in the United States, but nonetheless, the US at least pays lip service to it. And I don't mean lip service in the sense that Britain is not an important ally. It certainly is. So there is significance to that. But, from the UK point of view, there is almost a sense of desperation about this because of Britain's very difficult position in Brexit. And, I think that's dangerous territory, frankly, because I don't think America really offers a substitute for the European Union.
Is that where the issue of trade comes in, though? I mean, is it not pragmatism that Theresa May and her advisors have to start talking about these things, knowing what position we will be in a few years' time?
It is pragmatic, but there are a couple problems. The first problem is that Donald Trump is a protectionist. He's certainly the first protectionist that's been in the White House at least since the Second World War. He said, there's suggestions he's going to make an exception for Britain, but we'll see. He has a very peculiar concept of international trade. The second problem is, of course, tariffs. The United States and Britain already have free trade. I mean, there are very, very low tariffs. To really get a huge economic benefit to replace what it's losing from the European Union, the United Kingdom would have to enter what, if you'll forgive the expression, a single market with the United States. And that's unlikely to happen.
And you've alluded to how delicate, how tricky this situation is. How strong do you think Theresa May is going to be able to be on those big issues where Donald Trump has been very bullish, on NATO, on Russia and Putin, really fundamental issues like that?
Again, I don't think it's easy to answer this question in terms of the personality and the worldview of President Trump. In terms of reaffirming the commitment to NATO, the importance of NATO, of course, there's a larger institutional American commitment. The Congress is completely committed and very suspicious of Russian intentions. And so is President Trump's new defense secretary, Jim Mattis. So there is, institutional sinew to and receptivity to the message that came from Theresa May yesterday in Philadelphia. Whether Trump himself is going to hear it, I don't know. A very interesting early test. I mean, it has been reported that there is already an executive order ready to suspend sanctions on Russia. And that would bring America's NATO allies, including Britain, into a very interesting and tricky position. And I don't know what the answer would be.
Well, perhaps when we get more on that, you and I will be talking about that again. Thank you very much for now, Dana Allen. Thank you from the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to bring an update on one of the stories we've been covering today. Joe Stevens, who's the first member of the Shadow Cabinet to quit over the forcing of Labour MPs to back the Article 50 bill by Jeremy Corbyn. The Labour leader has just tweeted a response. He said, "I would like to thank Jo for her work. She's a great asset to the Labour Party. I understand the difficulties that she and other MPs have when facing the Article 50 bill. Those MPs with strong Remain constituencies are understandably torn," he says. However, it is right that the Labour Party respects the outcome of the referendum on leaving the European Union. We've said all along that Labour will not frustrate the triggering of Article 50, and to that end, we are asking all MPs to vote for the bill at its second reading next week. He goes on to wish Joe Stevens well for the future. But reaction there from Jeremy Corbyn.
But much more coming up in the next half hour, including keeping an eye on what's going on in Washington, of course. But we'll just pause, find out what the weather has in store for us back home. Helen Willits has the details. Hello.
Hello, Jane. Hello, Simon. Hello to you. All change for the weekend. It's been cold. It's been dry for so long now, but all that is now slowly changing. It's a slow process, so we still do have some of the cold, foggy weather with the ice around across the northeast of England, eastern parts of Scotland. But generally speaking, the next few days will be much milder and largely frost-free, with just a few exceptions. The change is coming about because we're allowing this cold air to sink back into the continent, and it's milder Atlantic air coming in. But always, as is always the case with transition, it will be a rather messy one, cloudy, quite grey and murky. Some rain, still cold air around, so some winteriness in the showers, perhaps some ice as well as it falls onto frozen surfaces. Scotland, particularly Northern Ireland, later in the night. But Saturday does look quite promising, actually, across the likes of Northern Ireland and the western fringes where we've had the cloud and the rain today. It will, though, linger the rain, showery rain further east, and still feel quite cold because of the cloud into Saturday. And then some question marks over Sunday, but I'll have more detail if you can join me in half an hour.
Screen one, please.
Really? It's incredibly dull and about half an hour too long.
Screen two?
Well, it's your money, but I mean, if you pay them to make that sort of thing, they'll just make more of it.
Screen three.
Let me give you a tip. Screen four. It's a masterpiece. Exquisite cinematography, evocative soundtrack, and some unexpected Norwegian laughter.
Mark Kermode joins Gavin Esler to pass judgment on the week's new films. The Film Review, tonight at 5:45 on the BBC News Channel.
Hello, good afternoon. This is BBC News with Simon McCoy and Jane Hill.
4:30, our main stories. And the Prime Minister, Theresa May, is expected to arrive shortly at the White House to meet President Donald Trump for talks on trade and security.
In advance of that meeting, Theresa May laid a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier at Arlington Cemetery in Virginia.
A haulage boss and a mechanic have been jailed for a total of 12 years following a tipper truck crash that killed 4 people, including a 4-year-old girl, in Bath.
A member of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet has resigned in protest at his decision to force Labour MPs to vote in favour of triggering Brexit.
Plans to restrict hip and knee replacements in Worcestershire in order to save money have been described as alarming by the Royal College of Surgeons.
Britain's biggest supermarket, Tesco, is to buy the leading wholesaler Booker for £3.7 billion.
Time for the sport at the BBC Sports Centre. It is Lizzie Greenwood-Hughes.
Thank you, Simon. What a build-up. Good afternoon. Well, there's a dream lineup for nostalgic tennis fans in the Australian Open men's final. Rafa Nadal will play his old rival Roger Federer in Melbourne on Sunday after Nadal fought off Grigor Dimitrov in an epic semi today to reach his first Grand Slam final in nearly 3 years. Drew Savage reports.
14 Grand Slam titles to his name, but nothing since the French Open back in 2014. With Roger Federer waiting in the final, Nadal and his many fans were hoping that he, too, could turn back the clock. No problems in the first set against Grigor Dimitrov. Nadal won that 6-3. But the Bulgarian, aiming to reach his first Grand Slam final at the age of 25, was only getting going, winning a marathon second set to square things up. This was turning into a classic. You could hardly separate the two players. Nadal showed why he's played 23 semi-finals and only lost 3, edging the third set on a tie-break. The scene was set for the Spaniard to triumph. Just one problem, Dimitrov wasn't giving up. Squaring the match at 2 sets all, this one was going all the way. It took nearly an hour for Nadal to make the breakthrough in the decider. And after 5 hours of top-quality tennis, finally a chance to rest. With an opportunity to make history in the final against Federer, he'll need to. Drew Savage, BBC News.
We had the chance to be again in a final, and especially in the first of the year. So happened. I think both of us, we worked very hard to be where we are. So it's great, and it's great that again we are in a moment like this, and we're gonna have the chance to enjoy again a moment like this.
I'm gonna stay positive and keep my head up high. For sure, Rafa deserves pretty much all the credit right now, since he's such a fighter, such a competitor. It was in the same time, it was an honor for me to play a match like that against him, but it also shows me that I'm on a good way, I'm on the right path.
Well, there's live coverage of both the men's and the women's finals on BBC Radio 5 Live and highlights later on BBC television. Let's move on to football now. Leicester City will hope to halt their slide in domestic form when they travel to Derby County in the first of this weekend's FA Cup fourth round games tonight. It is live on BBC One and BBC Radio 5 Live. The Premier League champions Leicester are only 5 points off the relegation zone, with Derby pushing for promotion just outside the Championship playoff places.
They put on the best team, because we need to go through the cup. We need to get confidence, because we lost so many matches in the last days.
Now, the six-time Paralympic champion David Weir says he was gobsmacked by the way he was treated by the British athletics wheelchair racing coach Jenny Banks, claiming she'd called him a disgrace to his country after he failed to win a medal in Rio last summer. Weir confirmed he'll never race for his country again.
After the relay, she sort of laid into me and said that I was a disgrace to the country, and you've let the country down. I know you've done that on purpose, and I know you've... I don't know, but there was loads of things going backwards and forwards from me and her, and I just felt a little bit belittled, and why would I throw a race for what, to upset who? I'm here to win medals for Team GB.
Well, here is the response from British Athletics. They say, we can confirm there was a frank exchange of views between an athlete and the relay coach following the race when the GB men's wheelchair team failed to qualify for the final. We can also confirm that we've met with Mr. David Weir to receive firsthand his feedback on his experiences in Rio, and that we're working to ensure we learn from them ahead of future team events. Just time for some golf now, and there is a record-breaking tie for the lead at the Qatar Masters. Welshman Bradley Dredge and England's Andy Sullivan are 2 of 9 players tied on 8 under par, a record going into the third round of a tour event. Dredge made level par after his second round, but Sullivan was one of the day's big movers. He was part of the European Ryder Cup team last year, and he made 4 under par to give him a share of the lead. As I say, 9 of them on 8 under par. Well, that's the sport for now. We'll have more for you in the next hour. Join us then.
Lizzie, thank you very much. Tesco, the UK's largest retailer, has agreed to buy Britain's largest food wholesaler, Booker, in a deal worth £3.7 billion. It would mean Tesco gaining a massive share in supplying restaurants, pubs and convenience stores in the UK. News of the deal sent shares soaring in both companies, as Emma Simpson reports.
Tesco already has the lion's share of the UK's grocery business. Now it's got its sights on serving even more customers. It struck a deal to buy Booker. You may not have heard of it, but this wholesaler supplies thousands of pubs, restaurants, caterers and corner shops. This market's growing faster than selling groceries in the supermarkets, and Tesco wants a slice of it.
What we do see, Charles and I, is
the two company bosses side by side for a webcast this morning to explain why this surprise £3.7 billion deal makes sense.
The ability to improve the core offer of both the retail operation but also the independent and small business operation that Charles currently serves is definitely going to drive growth. That better choice, better range, better value, better price.
But what will the wider impact be? Booker doesn't own these convenience stores, but they do own the brands, and they supply all the goods to the independent retailers who run them.
Tesco has about 10% of the convenience and on-the-go food market today in our estimates. Booker has a similar share, or probably even bigger, of the convenience market. And so clearly Tesco supplying both of them will make it a bigger force in convenience retail.
That may prompt some concerns, including from the competition authorities, who are likely to scrutinise this deal. If approved, it's a big, bold move by Tesco, extending its already formidable reach. Emma Simpson, BBC News.
22 minutes to 5. Let's take a look at a few other stories in the news this afternoon. And the number of urgent operations cancelled across the NHS is now the highest on record. Data from NHS England shows more than 4,000 urgent operations were cancelled last year.
A man in his 70s has been arrested by police investigating historical allegations of abuse related to football. The BBC understands he's Michael Sean Carson, better known as Kit. He's former youth football coach with Norwich City, Peterborough and Cambridge United.
Restaurants in France have been banned from offering unlimited sugary drinks in an attempt to reduce obesity levels. It's now illegal to sell unlimited soft drinks at a fixed price or offer them unlimited for free. The number of overweight or obese people in France is below the EU average, but it is on the rise. Here, the Royal College of Surgeons says plans to ration knee and hip replacement operations in Worcestershire are alarming. 3 commissioning groups say very obese patients and people who are in only moderate pain won't qualify. They say the plan will save £2 million a year. More details from our health correspondent, Robert Piggott.
At 5 feet 10 inches and weighing a little over 18 stone, Gordon Wainwright of Malvern in Worcestershire can no longer expect swift access to the second hip replacement he needs. The pain from Mr. Wainwright's osteoarthritis wakes him up at night and his mobility is badly compromised. But new restrictions on surgery mean he'd have to lose 10% of his weight before he could qualify for surgery.
It's a very, very sharp pain, very sharp pain in my hip. It's not an ache, it's very, very sharp. Literally, if I turn over, it's like, I mean, I haven't really been fully fit in terms of being able to walk properly or just go for a walk for what? Pre-2013. It would dramatically change my life.
The first total hip replacement was carried out in an English hospital in 1962. More than 50 years on, this revolutionary procedure is being widely rationed. The clinical commissioning groups in Wyre Forest, Redditch and Bromsgrove and South Worcestershire will exclude from hip and knee replacements patients who rank as morbidly obese or those whose pain is not sufficiently severe to interfere with their daily life. The Royal College of Surgeons says the restrictions are not clinically justified and will often be a false economy.
The patient continues to be in pain, he needs painkillers, he needs physiotherapy, he may be unable to work. And he'll be in severe pain for a long period of time. And also, by waiting, the operation may indeed become more difficult when he eventually gets it.
The The clinical commissioning group said they were bringing Worcestershire into line with what other CCGs do. They said if a patient feels they require this surgery but do not meet these criteria, there is a clear appeal system. Several other commissioning groups in England, including in Harrogate, the Vale of York, Shropshire and the south coast of Kent, are imposing similar restrictions on non-emergency surgery. Demand for hip and knee replacements is growing with an ageing population, but the money to pay for them is increasingly scarce. Robert Piggott, BBC News.
A former judge and his assistant have been jailed for 6 years for defrauding their own law firm out of more than £600,000. The pair siphoned off the money to pay for a lavish lifestyle. Our correspondent Dan Johnson is at Southwark Crown Court.
Well, there was some debate about the total amount of money. There were questions about whether it was £650, perhaps as much as £1 million. But in the end, the sentence was given on the basis of about £640,000 that this pair defrauded from their own clients, from their law firm, which was based in Chelsea in Sussex, called CK Solicitors. And the list of things they bought with that money is fairly impressive. They bought second homes, third, fourth homes. They had holidays to Barbados. One of those trips involved 12 people and cost £27,000. There was a Range Rover, there was a log cabin with a hot tub, there were days out at the Cheltenham Festival. So they were enjoying this money. Now initially the court was told that this started as a way of just propping up the business, of keeping it afloat. That was how Simon Kenny, former deputy district judge and solicitor, kept his business going. But then Emma Coates, his assistant, who was also in an affair with him at that time, the judge said that she had an instinct for excess and extravagance, and that's what led to the lavish spending that she went on. He said when there was money, she took it for her own needs. She regarded it as her own. It is difficult to imagine a more spectacular breach of trust, and she's shown no evidence of regret or remorse. One theft involved £85,000 from the estate of an elderly woman who had passed away. Now, this was a breach of trust by someone in a senior position because this was money that had been placed with them essentially for safekeeping. Now, they told other colleagues in the law firm that they were moving it abroad for safety because of the banking crisis. And one sad aspect to the case is that the firm's accountant belatedly realised what was going on and realised that he'd been duped by the pair. He actually took his own life because he felt under pressure from what he had belatedly realised he'd been part of. Well, the judge who gave the sentence here, quite a strange situation, one former judge in the dock, one judge giving the sentence, he said this was a very serious case and that's why he's handed down 6-year sentences to both Simon Kenny and to Emma Coates.
Dan Johnson there at Southwark Crown Court.
Just to let you know, President Trump, apart from, of course, meeting Theresa May a little later, got a busy few days ahead. He's expected to sign an executive action today, which will temporarily halt the flow of refugees into the United States and stop all entries from some majority Muslim nations. This confirming what his spokesman Sean Spicer had said earlier in the week. He'll sign the order during a visit to the Pentagon. A draft order obtained by the media also shows Trump may indefinitely ban all refugees from Syria.
So that is due to be signed at some point today. That is what we are hearing, and we are, of course, keeping an eye on everything that's going on there at the White House. Theresa May due there within the next 15 minutes if things are running to schedule. We're not quite sure whether they are, but if they are, she should be there within the next 15 minutes, and there should be a news conference beginning at about 6 o'clock this evening, our time. But we are very much keeping an eye on all of that. As soon as she arrives and as soon as that news conference begins, of course, you'll be able to see all of that here. The Church of England shouldn't change its teaching on marriage as the lifelong union of one man and one woman, according to the House of Bishops, which forms part of the General Synod. It says there is little support for same-sex marriage inside the Church, but it did urge a fresh tone of support, as it put it, for gay people. Here's our religious affairs correspondent, Martin Bashir.
For an ancient institution, 3 years of so-called shared conversations about same-sex relationships were not expected to radically alter church doctrine. And today's report from the House of Bishops lands squarely on the status quo, that marriage is a lifelong union between a man and a woman. The bishop who led the working group says that while the doctrine doesn't change, the church must adapt its tone.
It's not against the impact of cultural change. We uphold the authority of Scripture, the tradition of the church, in common with the vast and overwhelming majority of churches around the world. But what we want to do is to engage with the culture of which we are part. That culture has changed radically.
But lesbian and gay members of the church have reacted with disappointment, accusing the bishops of doing nothing to acknowledge the goodness or sanctity of lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender relationships.
Substantially no change in terms of the doctrine of marriage. A little bit of warmth, a little tilt perhaps in the direction of greater inclusion, but we're a long way from that yet. But I think that's pretty much what most people expected. It's a sort of classic Anglican fudge and a sideways step and a nudge in a different patch of the long grass perhaps.
Conservative evangelicals, however, have expressed relief that the bishops have upheld the authority of Scripture against the impact of cultural change.
I want the church to stand with the teaching of Jesus, and my understanding is Jesus taught very clearly that sex is for marriage and marriage is between a man and a woman. So I want the church to continue to teach what Jesus taught on that issue, to try and find ways of commending that lovingly to the world around us.
This report will be debated at General Synod, which begins in just over 2 weeks' time. Martin Bashir, BBC News at Church House in London.
In a moment, we'll take a look at how the financial markets in Europe have closed the day. First, just a reminder of today's headlines. Theresa May is in Washington to meet President Trump. They will have talks about trade, foreign affairs and strengthening ties between the UK and the US.
2 men have been sentenced to a total of 12 years for manslaughter after a runaway tipper truck killed 4 people in Bath.
A member of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet resigns in protest at his decision to force Labour MPs to vote in favour of triggering Brexit.
Hello, I'm Vishana Sripatha. Now a look at how the markets in Europe have ended the trading session. Well, the FTSE 100 is in positive territory this afternoon. Tesco shares rose 9% in morning trade. Among the main fallers were drug maker AstraZeneca and budget airline EasyJet after analysts warned about rising competition in the pharmaceutical and aviation sectors. Now, quarterly profits at BT have dived 37% after the firm reported an accounting scandal in its Italian division that cost it more than £500 million. It's now confirmed that their head of continental Europe will step down over the affair. The number of people declared insolvent because of unmanageable debts was 13% higher in 2016 compared with the previous year. Over 90,000 people in England and Wales found themselves in that situation. But even though the numbers are rising, they're still remaining well below the peak level of insolvencies reached in 2010. And Tesco, the UK's biggest supermarket, has negotiated a £3.7 billion deal to buy Booker Group, the UK's biggest food wholesaler. Booker supply everything from baked beans to tea bags to 700,000 convenience stores, including grocers, pubs and restaurants throughout the UK. Well, let's get detailed analysis of those stories from Richard Marwood of Royal London Asset Management. Richard, let's start with that Tesco deal. Shares are up 9% on the news and also bolstered by that announcement that they're going to reinstate dividend. How much do you think this move had to do with the fall in sterling and that sort of upward pricing pressure that it would put on suppliers?
I'm not sure that's the main driver. I think maybe this is a reaction by Tesco to having been under pressure for a number of years. Clearly Tesco's been pressurised by the discount stores and many of the supermarkets have struggled accordingly. What this deal does today is it means that essentially more of the food that the people in the UK eat will come from Tesco's through one route or another. So as well as just the food that we buy from the supermarkets, clearly now a lot of the food that we eat outside the home in a pub or a restaurant or from a fast food outlet will also indirectly come from Tesco's.
Now let's move on to BT. They've said that profits are down 37%. How are investors feeling about the year ahead? They've got a pension review in June, but they did just buy EE, the mobile phone operator, as well.
Well, it's been a very bruising week, really, for BT investors. The news that we had today didn't really add anything new. Actually, all the fireworks in BT happened earlier this week when they announced the accounting problem in Italy. But as you say, they have got issues on a number of fronts. They've got the relationship with their regulator Ofcom, they've also got the pension issue, and now they've got this Italian problem as well. The one thing that you mentioned there about the takeover of EE, actually that business is going quite well. In fact, all their consumer-facing businesses are going quite well. The area where they're struggling is actually in their corporate customers and also the business they do with the UK government.
OK, consumer debt at worrying levels, with inflation returning to the UK economy now and creeping up slightly. Do you worry that that figure might rise?
I think that is a risk, actually, because I think the cost of living is going to rise. With the way that the pound has fallen, a lot of prices are going to be going up. And actually it's going to be the prices of a lot of things that we don't have a great deal of discretion about whether we buy them or not. So the price of food, the price of fuel, the price of petrol, that's going to be going up. So people are going to be feeling a little bit poorer. And if it was a very tight balancing act already with to balance their cost of living and servicing their debt, it might get more difficult to do as inflation rises.
OK, Richard, thanks very much. Richard Marr with their overall asset management. Quick look at markets before we go. The FTSE 100 is in the green. We haven't got markets board behind me, but it is in the green. Over in the US, shares were down in morning trade. It'll be interesting to see how they react later today when the US President Donald Trump and the Prime Minister Theresa May meet. Well, that's it from me. There's plenty more business news on our website, bbc.co.uk/business. Jay.
Thanks, Vishala. Thank you. Now, the Hamadaymin family fled Iraq in 2015 because they were afraid that their profoundly deaf son would be killed by so-called Islamic State. He is now at a British school and learning sign language.
But the family is facing deportation to Germany because they entered the UK illegally. Sima Katecha has the story.
My name.
6-year-old Lawand was born deaf. He had a cochlear implant fitted when he was 18 months old. Now, for the first time, he's able to communicate how he's feeling through British Sign Language, after learning it here at the Royal School for the Deaf in Derby.
He's had to go right back from scratch, learning English, to learn to read and to write, and then learn sign language as well. And he's gone from reading nothing to being of an age 4.
The family fled Iraq after so-called Islamic State threatened to kill disabled children. They then spent a year living in a camp in Germany before making their way to France and then to England on the back of a lorry.
My life and my family's lives were in danger, so we had no other option but to leave Iraq and travel to Europe.
So when you see your son communicating so fluently now in sign language, how does that make you feel?
I am happy that my child is making progress in his life. Whatever I can do, I will do it for him. And I feel ecstatic.
Well, forgive us, we're pulling out of that because we're going to take you straight to the White House because we are reliably informed that Theresa May is about to arrive for that historic meeting with Donald Trump. As you can see, all the paraphernalia of the visit is out with the flags on display. There was a slight delay for the journalists getting in because apparently they'd submitted their accreditation forms with the birth dates in British form and the security service in the United States didn't get it. But anyway, that's all passed by. Here she comes. You can see the motorcade with the British Prime Minister now arriving at the White House.
And of course, she is the first overseas leader to meet the president since his inauguration. He has been in post formally only for 1 week, so she is the first to meet him. We were told by the White House a little earlier this afternoon that he was going to be having phone calls with other European leaders. There's several other European leaders this afternoon, but this is the first face-to-face meeting.
Well, let's talk to Barbara Pletasher. You're there, so describe what you see.
Well, the car just drove past as you saw it, and now the vehicle has stopped in front of the West Wing. Mrs. May will be getting out and into the building shortly to begin that meeting with Donald Trump. They have about an hour together before they're scheduled to give a news conference, and after that they're going to have a lunch, and I assume in that time he'll also be able to show her around his new quarters because he's been doing that to journalists who come to visit. I'm sure he'll be quite willing to do that to the first foreign leader who actually meets him in the White House.
So they've now met. He was waiting at the door and has invited her in. And actually, a couple of photographs taken, and they'll be whizzing their way around the various airways very quickly. And people are going to be analysing every photograph of those two of them for a long time yet, aren't they?
Yes, every photograph, and especially the news conference. People are going to be looking at the body language between these very different leaders. It's something that there's been quite a bit of talk about, probably the most different leaders of any American and British president and prime minister for a long time, if ever. Mr. Trump being such a brash, bold character, coming from New York with his background in real estate and business, being quite ready to stir controversy, shake things up, not really worry about where they fall in the end. And Mrs. May, coming from a very different background, of course, the daughter of a small town vicar, very reserved, cautious, very meticulously briefed. So the question is how they will get along. I think both of them will be trying very hard to do so today. It's also in Mr. Trump's interest to show a successful visit by his first foreign visitor. So I think we'll hear a lot of words that are, a lot of rhetoric about the relationship between Britain and America being very special still. And they will probably both try to be on their best behavior. But you know how it is. There's always that unpredictability with Mr. Trump. So we'll see what he actually ends up saying at the news conference.
Yep, we'll be back to you later, Barbara. Thank you very much.
We certainly will. That news conference due at 6. Whenever it happens, you'll be able to see it here. We will leave you just with a quick look at the weather. Here's Helen Willits. Hello.
Hello, Jane and Simon. Hello there. Good afternoon. It's been a day of transition. It's still cold in some areas. Sorry, we've still got some frost around at the moment, but actually the coming few days look much, much milder. And that's because the air is changing its source. At the moment, we've had that cold continental air. We're pulling in instead this somewhat milder Atlantic air. It's still cold out there at the moment, as I say, and as we go through the evening and overnight, there could be a smattering of snow and some icy conditions for Scotland, parts of north east England, but particularly later in the night across Northern Ireland after the rain, when the roads left damp, it could get quite icy first thing tomorrow morning, but not as cold as it has been, but still with a wintry element, particularly in the north and the east. The west will see the best of the sunshine as we go through tomorrow. Not a bad day at all. Still not particularly warm though, as you can see, whilst further east it's still quite grey. The rain takes much of the day to clear away. Now, there is a slight question mark still about Sunday. It looks as if we've got another weather front pushing in off the Atlantic. So for England and Wales, as the day progresses, some wetter weather, more than we've had for a while, but in the north at least some drier, brighter weather.
Coming up next on the BBC News Channel, it's the news at 5. Later this evening, Outside Source covers all the latest global stories at 9. Followed by another chance to see tonight's Newsnight at 11:15.
Today at 5, in the last few minutes, Theresa May has arrived at the White House to meet President Trump. Mrs. May is the first foreign leader to meet the new president. They'll discuss trade deals and renewing the special relationship. Ahead of her Oval Office meeting, Mrs. May laid a wreath at the Arlington National Cemetery War Memorial. We'll have the very latest live from Washington. The other main stories on BBC News at 5. 2 men jailed for a total of 12 years for manslaughter after a tipper truck killed 4 people, including a 4-year-old. 2 men jailed for a total of 12 years for manslaughter after a tipper truck killed 4 people, including a 4-year-old girl. Tesco's share price rises sharply after the supermarket chain says it's buying the food wholesaler Booker, including its chains of convenience stores. Will face Federer in the Australian Open final. Hello, good evening. It's 5 o'clock in our main story tonight. In the past few minutes, Theresa May has arrived at the White House to hold talks with Donald Trump. She's the first foreign leader to visit since Mr. Trump became president. Here we have the pictures of the Prime Minister arriving with President Trump just a few moments ago and going straight into the White House. Global security and a trade deal after Brexit are high on the agenda. The Prime Minister will be holding a joint press conference, we expect, with